Chapter 7. When the boy came home after each long trip in search of his father, the crippled coon hound would hobble far down the road to meet him, wag his tail, stand on his hind legs, and paw the boy with his good front paw. But never a sound beyond a deep whine came from him. The bits of news he might bring home his mother received in silence. Someone had heard that his father was moved. Someone had been in the same work gang with his father for 4 months last summer on the Walker County Road. When she heard all she had heard, she would say, "There's patience, child, and waitin' it's got to be." Word drifted back that there had been a terrible dynamite blast in one of the quarries that had killed 12 convicts and wounded several others. His mother had had the people read her the story from the newspaper when she carried the laundry. None of the prisoners killed was the boy's father. The months and seasons of searching dragged into years, and the boy helped his mother carry more and more baskets of laundry to and from the big houses. The clothesline grew longer and longer. The other children, except the littlest, could fetch and tote too, but they didn't like to go by themselves. "Time is passing," the woman would say. "I wish you wouldn't go looking, child." But when one of the field hands had heard something, or when someone said that the road camp was moving, she would wrap a piece of bread and meat for the boy to eat on the way and say nothing. Looking back from far down the road, the boy would see her watching at the edge of the porch. She seemed to understand the compulsion that started him on his long, fruitless journey with new hope. Once the boy waited outside the tall wire fence of the road camp, some convicts were whitewashing stones along the edge of the pathway that came toward the gate near where he stood. One might be his father, he thought. He could not tell until he got closer, for they crawled on their hands and knees as they bent over the stones. He leaned against the fence and hooked his fingers through the wire. If none of them was his father, they might know something anyway, he thought. He wished that he would stand up and walk from one stone to the next. Then he would know his father's easy. He would know his father easy by his walk. He could still remember the sound of his footsteps approaching the cabin after dark, the easy roll of his never-hurry step that was the same when he went to work in the morning and when he came home from a long day in the fields. The boy was able to tell his father's walk by the sway of the lantern at his side, but none of the men whitewashing the round rocks that lined the path stood up and walked. They crawled for a few feet from stone to stone, and crawling they all looked the same. Suddenly, something crashed against the fence in front of the boy's face. A jagged piece of iron. Tore open the skin and crushed the fingers of one of his hands against the fence. Lost in thought and watching the convicts, the boy had not seen the guard, who had been sitting under a tree with a shotgun across his knees, get up and come to the toolbox filled with picks and crowbars which stood near the fence. The piece of iron lay on the inside of the fence at the boy's feet. Drops of blood from his fingers dripped down the fence from wire to wire and fell on the ground. The boy pulled his fingers away from the wire mesh and began to suck on them to stop the throbbing. Tears ran down over his face and mixed with the blood on his hand. Little rivulets of blood and water ran down his arm and dropped off the end of his elbow. The guard was swaying back and forth with laughter. His gun lay on the lid of the open toolbox, his arms swinging like gyrations of glee, and he held another piece of iron in one hand and his cap in the other. A white strip of forehead, where his uniform cap kept the sun off, shone between his brown hair and his sunburnt face. His laughter had burst the button on his tieless shirt collar, and the white strip outlined his gaunt neck. For the second, he reminded the boy of the garden scarecrow blowing in the wind. Body and head of a brown burlap stuffed with straw, the head tied with a white rag just like the white band around the guard's neck. the head tilting from side to side, inviting a well-placed stone to send it bouncing along a bean row. The men, whitewashing the rocks, made no sound. No one among them suddenly raised his head to the height of the man, almost as tall as the cabin porch post. He ain't there, the boy murmured to himself. If he was, the boy knew by now he would be holding the scarecrow of a man in the air, with one hand clamped all the way around that white strip on of the skinny neck, the way he had seen Sounder clamp his great jaws on a weasel once, with the head stuck out one side of the jaws and the body on the other. And the man would wheeze and squirm like the weasel had. His legs would paw the air in circles like his hand, and then he would go limp. The boy's father would loosen his grip, and the man in the brown uniform would fall into a heap, like when somebody untied the white rag that held the scarecrow to the stake. And the heap would roll down the slope and lodge against the fence, like the scarecrow rolled along the bean row, until it caught the brambles at the edge of the garden. Feeling defeated in the midst of his glee because the boy had not run but stood still in defiance, sucking the blood from his bruised fingers, the guard stopped laughing and yelled at him. "That'll show you, boy. Get fast." The boy turned and, without looking back, began to walk slowly away. The guard began to laugh again and threw a scrap of iron over the fence. It landed a few feet from the boy. He looked at the iron, looked at the man. The white spot between his hair and eyes was the spot. The iron would split it open with a wide gash, and the blood would darken the white spot and make it the color of the man's sunburnt face. And the stone that David slung struck Goliath on the forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face on the ground, the boy thought. But he left the iron on the ground. Still sucking his fingers, the boy looked once more at the men whitewashing the stones. They were almost at the gate. He didn't need to wait and ask. His father was not crawling among them. End for the day.